How's it going, everybody? So in this video I got a modern budget Rakdos deck for you. This deck has a lot of potential, and if you want to spend a little bit more money, you can easily upgrade it without sacrificing too much of the core to the deck. This deck runs a lot of powerful and well-played cards, especially in the modern format. I think you could definitely steal some games and have a good night with this deck. However, you're definitely not going to win probably a national tournament with it. Anyway, though, let's get into the deck. We'll start off with the creatures. For the creatures, we're going to run 4 Dragon's Rage Channeler. For 1 red mana, we're going to get a 1/1 on the board. One of the most important parts about this card is it has Surveil. So every time we cast a non-creature spell, we're going to be able to look at the top card of our library. We can put it into our graveyard. This deck does utilize our graveyard and try to cheat things out, so this card is going to provide us a lot of value throughout the game. This is also one of the somewhat downsides of this deck, is the reliance on the graveyard. However, we don't need it to win, it just provides us a lot of extra value. If we do have Delirium, then this card is going to be a 3/3 with flying, but it must attack. Sometimes this might hurt us if we need a blocker, however it's definitely beneficial because this is more of a aggro style deck. We definitely don't want to play defensive on this deck unless we absolutely have to. We definitely want to be aggressive. Next up, we're running 2 Dreadhorde Arcanist. It's a 2 mana 1/3 trample. However, whenever this card attacks, we can cast an instant or sorcery card with the converted mana cost less than or equal to this card's power from our graveyard. We don't have any ways of buffing this, so it's always going to be played at 1. However, almost all of our instances and sorceries are 1 mana, so this is going to give us a lot of additional value by casting some additional spells for free. Only running 2 because we kind of want to have our graveyard built up, and there's definitely better cards to play, but when this card does perform, it performs very well. Next up is 4 Bone Crusher Giant. You have to first cast it for its adventure cost, so it's going to cost 2 mana, and you basically deal 2 damage to anything, which isn't amazing because cards like Lightning Bolt and Shock are just a lot better than that. However, this card is 2 cards in 1, so we get to deal 2 damage to any target, which is always valid. We could ping our opponent's life, we could do whatever. Then for the following turn, we can play it for 3 mana, and it's a 4/3. And if someone does target this card, it's going to deal 2 damage to them. It's a great card, highly recommend running, definitely a modern style card. Next up, we're running 1 Graveyard's Trespasser. I would run probably more in this, but the space is kind of limited. It's a 3 mana 3/3 that has wards, and you must discard a card. So if someone targets this with a spell, they have to discard as part of the activation cost. Every time this card enters the battlefield or attacks, we get to exile a card from a graveyard. And if it's a creature, we gain a life and our opponent loses a life. Definitely a modern card because almost everybody plays with their graveyard. Also, it can be flipped, which it becomes a 4/4 now, and then you get to exile some more stuff from a player's graveyard. You can definitely opt to play more of these. I just have running 1 for right now, but definitely a great card. And then the last card, Lightning Skelemental. This is kind of like the root of what this deck is based on. One of my favorite cards too. It's a 3 mana 6/1 with trample and haste. Whenever it deals damage to a player, that player discards 2 cards. However, we must sacrifice it at the beginning of the end step. This deck wants to cheat this card in, send it to the graveyard using Dragon's Channeler or just some other card, and then reviving it using other cards you'll see in a second. But this card, if we can get this out turn 2 or even turn 3 with some follow-up, is incredibly detrimental for our opponent. Definitely running 3 because this card is super fun. So these are all the creatures. You can definitely opt to play maybe 1 or 2 more and take out some of the instances or sorceries. And right now, Rakdos in Modern has a lot of powerful cards. So these aren't necessarily the best, but these are really good quality cards that are just really cheap right now. Moving on to the instances and sorceries, we're playing 4 Lightning Bolt. This card is just so good. You're going to be playing this in almost any single red deck. 1 mana, deal 3 damage to anything. This helps control the board by destroying creatures or even planeswalkers, but you can also target players, so whittling them down even further. I've won several games with just controlling the board and then Lightning Bolt 1 or 2 times to my opponent's face, just because that's how kind of Modern works. A lot of times, you lose life because of lands and stuff. Sometimes a well-timed Lightning Bolt just wins the game, so don't underestimate that. Running 2 Unholy Heat. It deals 2 damage to a planeswalker or creature, but if you do have Delirium, it deals 6 damage instead. This pairs very well with this deck and Dragon's Rage Channeler, because we are filling our graveyard up pretty quickly. The only problem is if this is not live, you don't have Delirium, that dealing that 2 damage is just not good. So I definitely get worried with all the graveyard hate in the format that this card sometimes gets turned off, and dealing 2 damage is not good enough. You also cannot target players, so that definitely changes things for me, where I would like Lightning Bolt a little bit more. Great card. You could definitely add 4 if you feel like it. Running 1 Blood Chief's Thirst. We can destroy any creature, planeswalker, or 2 mana or less, and we can kick it for a total 4 mana to destroy anything, really. I like this card a lot in Modern because a lot of creatures are 2 mana or less. It also can target Red and 6, which is a powerhouse of a card. Later in the game, it does have the potential to destroy anything, but there are some situations where Unholy Heat is just better. I think it's a good idea to have a combination of some Unholy Heats and the Blood Chiefs just in the main deck or sideboard, just to flip-flop depending on the matchup that you're facing. Fatal Push is another really good option that I did not add to this deck because I wanted to keep it under 50 bucks. Fatal Push is probably a lot better than this card just because it has its instant speed and could also destroy converted mana cost creatures 4 or less. However, we're not running fetch lands, which makes that card a lot worse because we can't trigger the revolt, so I'm opting to have this for now. Moving on, we're running 4 Inquisition of Kozilek because looking at our opponent's hand and sniping something out of it is great, but also getting that information is something we need. There are a lot of situations obviously where like cards like Thoughtseize are infinitely better, but from a price point perspective, this card is great. Some people might argue that you don't need the Inquisition in this deck because we are going more aggro, but I like having the ability to see our opponent's hands, snipe something from it potentially, especially in Modern. Most things are 3 or less anyway, and just getting that information to plan out the next turn or two is pretty invaluable to me. Next up, we're running 4 Unearth. For 1 mana, we can turn a creature with 3 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield. This is how we're going to cheat out Lightning Skelemental and potentially some other cards, but Lightning Skelemental is going to be the main one that we're going to want to focus on. This also has cycling for 2, so we can discard it and draw a card. Overall, really good card. Really want to get Lightning Skelemental off with that. So these are all the 1 mana options that Dreadhorde Arcanist can target. Moving on, we have Terminate. So for red and black, we destroy any target creature that can't be regenerated. It's also instant speed, so this is going to be the main way we're going to be destroying, a lot more powerful creatures, maybe like Murktide or something else that like Lightning Bolt, Unholy Heat, or maybe Blood Chiefs can't really hit until later in the game. But for 2 mana, destroying any creature is insane. Next up is called the Dweller. This is Unearth ×2, so we get to return 2 target creatures with converted mana cost 3 or less from our graveyard. One gets a Death Touch counter and the other gets a Menace counter. If this card goes off when you have Lightning Skelementals in the graveyard, it's almost game. We're running 2 of these because it does require a little bit of setup. You need to have things in your graveyard. You definitely don't want to see this in your opening hand. You want to see it a little bit later in the game. I have played a game in a variation of this deck where I did play that and I got 2 Lightning Skelementals, 12 damage. My opponent was not expecting it. Definitely powerful and surprising card. If your opponent's not expecting you to run this either, definitely surprise them with it. So these are all the instances and sorceries. We got a lot of removal, some burn, some information gathering cards, and a lot of cards that return things back from the graveyard. To round out the cards, we're running the baubles. Right now, I think these are like $1 or $2 a piece, which is actually kind of cheap because these things were pretty expensive. But this card is kind of needed in this deck because we need ways of getting Delirium, and we are not running fetch lands because they're pretty expensive. So this just gives an easier way of getting Delirium. There's also a free card too, because for 0 mana you kind of get to sacrifice it, draw an extra card next turn, and you get to look at the top card of your opponent's library if you want, or your own. But kind of information gathering is pretty important. I definitely would spend the money on these cards. I know it might not feel that amazing, but it is really good, especially for this deck. You kind of need it. Moving on to the lands, definitely do not skip this part. It's incredibly important. You hit your land drops exactly when you need them to. In Modern, missing a land drop or not hitting a land at a certain time usually costs you the game. The most expensive card in the deck is Black Cleave Cliff, so I'm not skipping on this because you absolutely need it. You get a playset of these for around 12 bucks right now, which is incredible because I bought each of these at like 30 bucks a while ago. And it's just about if it's tapped unless you control 2 or fewer lands. So as long as you control 2 or less lands, you get to play this untapped. You want to see this card in your opening hand or at least turn 2 because you want to be able to cast your spells on turn 1 and turn 2, and you need red and black equally as important from a 1 mana perspective. You saw we had all the Lightning Bolts and the Inquisitions. You want to have the ability to play red and black turn 1 every single game, and unfortunately in a budget build you're not going to get there, but this will help you at least try to get there. Then next up, we're running 8 swamps and 8 mountains. This is going to put us at 20 lands, which is a little low, but again, the deck does not need a lot of mana to operate. The absolute first thing I would do to upgrade this deck would be to get fetch lands, because in Modern you need to have access to the exact lands you need at every moment. In a deck like this, you want to have the ability to play something turn 1. So cards like Bloodstained Mire are probably top of the list. I mean, Blood Crypt is probably equally important too, but definitely the fetches are a little more important. That's also going to help you with Delirium. We did not include a sideboard into the price because the sideboard is going to vary a lot depending on the meta. Cards I recommend are something like Fulminator Mage. You can pick this up for about $1. 3 mana, it's a 2/2, but you get to sacrifice to destroy a land. Modern's got a lot of good lands, so you're going to want ways of destroying it. Duress is always a great budget option too for dealing with counter decks and decks that maybe run a lot of Planeswalkers or combo decks. For combo decks, it's a better Thoughtseize. Fatal Push is also a really good option for additional removal. Kolaghan's Command is great for the sideboard. It's really versatile and can be picked up for about $2 each. Some more Graveyard Trespassers either in the sideboard or main deck would be good too. Cling the Dust is good for graveyard removal, but it's also really good because it gains you some life if you're versing a lot of burn decks. Highly recommend adding Nile's Spellbomb. Sacrifice this card, exile all cards from target player's library so you don't have to affect yours, and you can also pay 1 extra black and draw a card. Really good for this deck because it's cheap. We have the access to the black to draw us cards, and an artifact in the graveyard helps with Delirium. I'm going to do some videos where I'm showcasing this deck on Magic the Gathering Online. I'm also going to play this deck with my friends this weekend. We do like playing Modern decks with like a certain criteria, so like under $50 or something like that. We think it's pretty fun and add some unique ways of building a deck and doing some deck techs like that and changing up the format a little bit. If you want to see some live duels with this or some Magic the Gathering Online with this deck tech, let me know down below in the comments. Anyway, thank you for watching. Stay tuned for some more Magic the Gathering videos while staying on a budget. You definitely play this game and play some powerful cards while staying on a budget, so stay tuned for some more. See you later.